forgiveness for the abuses in Ireland, abuses of power, conscience, and sexual abuses perpetrated by members with roles of responsibility in the church.
Somos todos hijos de Dios. Y Dios nos quiere como estamos y con la fuerza que luchamos cada uno por nuestra dignidad. El ser homosexual no es un delito. No es un delito. Sí, pero es pecado. Bueno, primero, distingamos pecado por delito. Pero también es pecado la falta de caridad con el prójimo. ¿Y vos cómo andás? Cada hombre y cada mujer tiene que tener una ventana en su vida donde pueda volcar su esperanza y donde pueda ver la dignidad de Dios. Y ser homosexual no es un delito.
Pope Francis may have been anything but not a dishonest man. His legacy is marked by his emphasis on mercy, social justice, and environmentalism, as well as his efforts to promote dialogue and unity within the Catholic Church and beyond. He challenged traditional church doctrine on issues like homosexuality and divorce, and focused on the plight of migrants, refugees, and the poor. His papacy also saw a shift in the Church's focus, moving away from culture war issues and toward global problems like climate change and poverty.
In which, regrettably, many Christians supported the colonizing mentality of the powers that oppressed the indigenous peoples.
Elected in 2013 as the first pope from Latin America and the first Jesuit to hold the role, Francis set about reshaping the tone and direction of the Church, often rankling the traditionalist establishment in the process. Among the most contentious issues during his tenure was his outreach to the LGBTQ+ community. In 2013, just months into his papacy, he famously responded to a question about gay priests by saying, "Who am I to judge?"
Last year, you decided to allow Catholic priests to bless same-sex couples. That's a big change. Why?
No,
what I allowed was not to bless the union. That cannot be done because that is not the sacrament.
The remark made headlines around the world and signaled a shift in the Church's tone, even if it did not alter core doctrine. More recently, he approved a landmark policy allowing priests to bless same-sex couples, a move that angered many conservative bishops. His stance received pushback from some Catholic bishops in Africa, Poland, and elsewhere, who said they would not implement the new Vatican policy, while others downplayed it. The reaction showed how polarizing the issue remains, and how Francis's decade-long effort to make the Church a more welcoming place for the LGBT+ community was still able to spark resistance among traditionalist and conservative Catholic leaders.
Somos todos hijos de Dios. Y Dios nos quiere como estamos y con la fuerza que luchamos cada uno por nuestra dignidad. El ser homosexual no es un delito.
However, the biggest controversy during his papacy revolved around the scandal carried out by Cardinal Angelo Becciu.
Vatican court sentenced a cardinal to 5.5 years in jail for corruption and embezzlement. Listen to this, including directing contracts to companies owned by his brothers. 75-year-old Angelo Becciu is the former head of the Office of Miracles that minted saints. He was once considered a...
The Vatican's criminal court convicted Becciu in 2023 of embezzlement and other financial-related charges at the end of the so-called trial of the century. He is free while he appeals against the conviction and 5.5-year prison sentence. He had participated in the pre-conclave meetings that saw the appointment of the new pope. However, days later, the 76-year-old said he would not take part in the conclave for the good of the Church and due to his love for Pope Francis. "I have decided to obey as I have always done the will of Pope Francis, not to enter the conclave while remaining convinced of my innocence," Cardinal Becciu said in a statement.
This morning, disgraced Cardinal Becciu has pulled out of the conclave to choose a new pope. The Italian cardinal's at the heart of what's been called the Vatican's trial of the century. He was fired by Pope Francis in 2020 for allegations of financial misconduct.
The affair had become a headache for the Catholic Church, especially because of the credibility of the reforms undertaken by the late pontiff but not completed. Pope Francis appointed 110 of the 135 or so cardinals who voted in the conclave beginning on the 7th of May, with some Vatican watchers suggesting he did so to ensure his values and priorities would be carried into the next papacy. Becciu was once an influential chief of staff at the Vatican and a leading papal contender. But he fell from grace in 2020 when Pope Francis forced him to resign from his post as head of the Vatican's saint-making office and his rights as a cardinal due to allegations of financial misconduct.
Cardinal Angelo Becciu says Pope Francis accused him of embezzlement, but he denies any wrongdoing. Chris Livesay has the details from Rome.
Well, a stunning resignation of an influential Vatican cardinal, Angelo Becciu, resigning as the head of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints.
Becciu denied any wrongdoing but was convicted in December 2023. His appeal is scheduled to start in September. According to the Vatican Criminal Court's ruling, Becciu in 2014 managed to purchase a London property with funds from the Vatican Secretariat of State. In 2022, the Holy See sold the property for around 214 million euros to the Bain Capital investment firm, resulting in a net loss of more than 100 million euros for the Vatican.
As Cardinal Becciu becomes the highest-ranking church official in modern history to face trial for financial crimes. It centers around a murky property deal a few years ago when Cardinal Becciu was a very senior figure within Vatican hierarchy, in which the Vatican invested some 350 million euros in a London property in Chelsea that used to belong to Harrods, the department store, and was going to be converted into a luxury block of flats.
According to Italian media reports, Pope Francis had written letters expressing his desire for Becciu to be excluded from a conclave. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, a senior Vatican official who was seen as a leading candidate for the next pontiff, reportedly showed those letters to Becciu. The Becciu affair unfolded at a delicate time for the Catholic Church. Pope Francis oversaw major reforms, including a drastic downsizing of the central role of the Vatican's Secretariat of State in favor of local communities worldwide. Despite the scandal surrounding him, Becciu was a key ally of Pope Francis in his efforts to restructure the Vatican's institutions and finances. According to Francesco Di Chiomo, lawyer and vice-rector of the Luis University in Rome, Becciu was very close to the Pope. He was his trusted man, and I believe he also enjoyed the Holy Father's friendship and personal consideration in some way. However, regarding the scandal around the London property purchase, Di Chiomo said it showed that the late pontiff was uninformed about the management of the Vatican. If, instead, it had been ascertained that the Holy See's assets had been managed through investments agreed with the Holy Father, or in any case without his reservations, it is clear that the trial would have unfolded differently, and the outcome would have been different, Di Chiomo told Euronews. The deal was risky because it was not just a simple acquisition of a luxury property, but also an investment in a speculative fund, the lawyer said. The Vatican's assets have historically also been invested in assets that have nothing to do with the Vatican's core mission. This is true, Di Chiomo said. Pope Francis's reforms also concern the Vatican's public finances.
Let's turn to the Vatican, where Pope Francis's plans to fix the Holy See's finances are meeting some internal resistance. Joining us now is government reporter John Filane, who's covered the Vatican for many years and wrote a book called City of Secrets that looked at the murder of a Swiss.
Francis's reforms also concern the Vatican's public finances. During his pontificate, an anti-money laundering authority was established, whose task was also to oversee the Vatican's bank, the Institute for the Works of Religion, IAOR. The IOR has a controversial history dating back to the early 1980s. For example, the bank was enmeshed in the bankruptcy of Banco Ambrosiano, then Italy's biggest private bank. Banco Ambrosiano's chairman, Roberto Calvi, known as God's banker because of his Vatican links, was found hanging from London's Blackfriars Bridge in June 1982. The IOR owned a small part of Ambrosiano and was deemed partly responsible for the $1.3 billion in debts left by the private bank's collapse. However, for most observers, the Becciu case is quite different from the dark times of decades ago. Another aspect of Pope Francis's life that went wild was his climate advocacy. Francis was also outspoken about the climate crisis, dedicating his Laudato Si, published in 2015, to the issue. In it, he urged action to care for God's creation in the face of climate change and environmental degradation.
It's called Laudato Si, or Praised Be, on the care of our common home. Pope Francis's encyclical on the moral aspects of climate change and protecting the environment. Church leaders say that this is the first time the release of a papal encyclical has been so anticipated. A Brazilian climate change group even created an epic theatrical trailer for the Pope's words.
In 2017, he urged political leaders to support the consensus of the world that climate change and other environmental ills have created an ecological crisis that is harming the world's poorest the most. Francis and Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople, the top figure in Eastern Orthodox Christianity, called for urgent action to heal our wounded creation.
If we destroy creation, creation will destroy us. It's time to take out the trash.
Upon us fighting for God's creation.
But what exactly is an encyclical?
In 2020, he said the COVID-19 pandemic has shown how the Earth can recover if we allow it to rest, and must spur people to adopt simpler lifestyles to help a planet groaning under the constant demand for economic growth. His activism on the climate crisis won praise from environmentalists and world leaders, but drew criticism from church figures who believed he was venturing too far into secular politics. And then there is his take on divorced and remarried Catholics. The Pope's approach to divorced and remarried Catholics, who had long been barred from receiving communion, also proved divisive. In the 2016 document Amoris Laetitia, he encouraged a more compassionate and case-by-case approach to such individuals.
The comments and criticism against the apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia are respectable but wrong. Pope Francis spoke clearly before a group of Jesuits in a private meeting, and the Jesuit journal La Civiltà Cattolica has published his comments.
Francis sent a letter to bishops in Argentina on September 5, 2016, in which he praised a document they had written that said priests could, in some cases, offer the help of sacraments to Catholics living in irregular family situations as part of a broader effort to support and integrate divorced and remarried Catholics into the life of the Church. There are no other interpretations, Francis wrote. His endorsement was seen as remarkable, but prompted a backlash from traditionalists who accused him of diluting doctrine.
Come prenderci cura di coloro che, in seguito all'irreversibile fallimento del loro legame matrimoniale, hanno intrapreso una nuova unione.
Even Francis's more symbolic gestures, like choosing to live in a modest Vatican guest house instead of the apostolic palace, or washing the feet of prisoners and migrants on Holy Thursday, were sometimes seen by critics as performative or unsettling to tradition.
Come prenderci cura di coloro che, in seguito all'irreversibile fallimento del loro legame matrimoniale, hanno intrapreso una nuova unione. La Chiesa sa bene che una tale situazione contraddice.
But perhaps the most persistent controversy of his papacy was his handling of the Church's long-standing sexual abuse crisis. While Francis took steps to hold bishops accountable and created new commissions to investigate abuse, many survivors and advocates said the response remained inadequate. In 2018, his initial defense of a Chilean bishop accused of covering up abuse caused an international uproar. He later apologized and admitted he had made serious errors in judgment.
El día que me traigan una prueba contra el obispo Barros, ahí voy a hablar. No hay una sola prueba en contra. Todo es calumnia. ¿Claro? Gracias.
Despite the backlash, Francis remained committed to his vision of a more inclusive, humble, and globally engaged church. His critics within the Vatican often accused him of sowing confusion, while supporters argued he was bringing the church closer to the realities of modern life.
Que eso It was a friendly hug, but for survivors of sexual abuse at the hands of Chile's most notorious paedophile, the head of the Catholic Church might as well have lobbed a grenade.
After an initial honeymoon phase following Francis's election, which he himself predicted wouldn't last long, slowly, a cascade of criticism began to flow in when he started his serious decision-making, and it became clear that his papacy would mark a shift from the more conservative tone of his two immediate predecessors. In a nutshell, the Pope's clear decision to get involved in what is conventionally seen as political debates, from economics to migration policy, and of course which side he's taken, has been a source of debate nearly from the beginning. Early on, this debate focused on his advocacy for the poor and his routine criticism of the capitalist system and trickle-down economics, gaining him a reputation among some as a Marxist. His criticism of free market economics also led to pushback, especially from right-wing American Catholics. Famously, a conservative American radio media personality accused Francis of espousing pure Marxism in 2013. These allegations were further cemented when Francis received a crucifix shaped like a hammer and sickle, the traditional communist symbol, from Bolivian President Evo Morales during a 2015 visit to South America, and when, a few months later, he met with Fidel Castro during a brief stopover in Cuba in September of that year. Yet Francis consistently denied these accusations, arguing that he was merely promoting gospel values and the social doctrine of the Catholic Church. His views on immigration, climate change, and the environment were among the most controversial in his papacy. When the Pope published his encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si, in 2015, it was immediately met with a wave of backlash from critics who argued that climate change was a myth, certainly not something caused by humanity, as the Pope had argued, and was an issue the Church had no business engaging with. Papal critics shot back at the science of the document, calling it a sham, and again took issue with his criticism of the global market system. Pope Francis's repeated advocacy for an open-door policy for migrants and refugees within Europe and beyond also met resistance, not only from citizens who view the high migrant influx as a problem, but also from right-wing populist politicians who hold a much different view on the matter. Over the years, the Pope butted heads with several politicians on the issue, including Italian politician Matteo Salvini, Italy's former Minister of the Interior, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, whom the Pope is expected to meet during his visit to Hungary, and more recently, United States President Donald Trump for his mass deportation plans. So, with the new Vatican administration actively in the office, should we expect things to be done differently from how Pope Francis operated? Only time will tell. And that's it from us today. Until next time, thank you for watching.